I'll bet you a week's salary you quit before Friday. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 48 hours before he destroyed his own career. Seattle General in Savannah hums with the particular white noise of a pediatric ward at 6:13 a.m., ventilators breathing in steady mechanical rhythms, monitors beeping their patient surveillance, fluorescent lights casting everything in the color of clinical fluorescence. Laura Bennett moves through the hallways with the kind of quiet precision that comes from muscle memory spanning 2 decades, her white scrubs crisp, her badge clipped at the exact angle it should be. 3 months into her position at Seattle General. 3 months of watching. 3 months of documentation that no one else has noticed. She pauses at room 347. Chen lies in the pediatric bed with the particular stillness of a child who has learned to accept the unacceptable. 12 years old. Paralyzed from the waist down after a spinal cord injury that the surgical notes claim was a post-operative complication from what should have been routine pediatric spine stabilization. His father, Colonel Marcus Chen, sits in the visitor's chair in full dress uniform, the kind of dress uniform that tells you this man commands respect the way other men command rooms. The colonel's presence is the kind of quiet authority that makes the air pressure change, and Laura feels it the moment she steps into the doorway, though she shows nothing on her face. "Good morning, Dylan." "Colonel Chen." Her voice is steady, deferential, the careful inflection of a nurse speaking to a family with the kind of grief that doesn't need commentary. She moves to the bedside, her slight limp barely noticeable as she reaches for the blood pressure cuff. The limp is from Marja. The scar tissue running up her left leg is from Marja. The fact that she is here, in this hospital, checking the vitals of a paralyzed child whose father commands a Green Beret unit, is not coincidence. It is orders. It is mission. She can feel the tarnished challenge coin in her scrub pocket like a stone. The coin is the size of a silver dollar, struck from aircraft wreckage salvaged after an IED strike in Helmand Province 6 years ago. On one side, a unit insignia worn smooth by 10,000 hands. On the other side, the names of the men who didn't come home, 12 names engraved so small you have to know they're there to find them. Laura's hand finds it through the fabric of her scrubs, the way it has found it 3,000 times since the coin was pressed into her palm by hands that were trembling with something other than fear. The coin settles her. It centers her. It reminds her why she is standing here in Savannah instead of still stateside, instead of letting the shrapnel in her left leg prevent her from doing what needs to be done. "Vitals are stable," she says to Dylan, checking the blood pressure reading, 118/76, normal, clean, which is not what she expected. Dylan's chart shows 3 post-operative complications in 8 weeks. 3. And 2 other pediatric patients admitted to this ward in the same timeframe with similar complications following different procedures, different surgeons, same hospital. 1 complication could be bad luck. 2 could be coincidence. 3 is a pattern. A pattern is intelligence. Intelligence is why she is here. Colonel Chen watches her with the particular intensity of a man trained to notice details. His eyes track her movements, her limp, the way her hands move on the blood pressure cuff with the precision of someone who has done this 10,000 times. She feels his gaze like a weight, but she does not acknowledge it. The cardinal rule of undercover placement is this: never reveal you know you're being evaluated. So she charts the vitals, adjusts the fall line, and says nothing. "How's the pain level today, Dylan?" she asks the boy, and he says 4 out of 10 in the small voice of a child learning to live in a body that no longer obeys him. Laura nods, makes a note, and touches his shoulder, a moment of human contact that is not professional but is allowed because she is a nurse and this is what nurses do. They touch the untouchable. They comfort the uncomfortable. They bear witness to suffering with the kind of steadiness that comes from having already seen the worst. The break room at Seattle General smells like burnt coffee and the particular staleness of a space where people microwave leftover salmon at 2 a.m. Laura pours her second cup at 7:14 a.m., the liquid dark as motor oil, and she is standing at the counter reviewing the morning medication list when Dr. Whitfield enters. He arrives the way predators arrive, with the particular confidence of someone who has never been told no. His voice is the kind of voice that carries authority not because it earned it but because it claims it, the tone of a man whose uncle sits on the hospital board, whose family name appears on the East Wing, whose position at Seattle General is not a job but an inheritance. The other nurses in the break room recognize the shift in atmospheric pressure. They recognize what is about to happen. One by one, they find reasons to leave, a medication that needs checking, a patient that needs attending, a conversation that suddenly requires their urgent attention elsewhere. "I'll bet you a week's salary you quit before Friday," Whitfield announces, loud enough that the nurses lingering in the hallway can still hear him, loud enough that his words carry the particular cruelty of a man making a public declaration. He is smiling the way apex predators smile when they have identified prey that cannot escape. Laura does not turn around. She continues pouring her coffee with the steady hand of someone who has held surgical sites together under fire, who has tightened tourniquets while counting her own blood loss in liters, who has learned that composure is the most lethal weapon available to anyone without authority. The coffee steam rises, and she lets it rise, and she does not acknowledge that Whitfield has spoken until she has finished pouring, until she has placed the carafe back in the machine, until she has turned around to face him with a particular calmness that comes from having already survived the worst. "Is that so?" she says. Not a question. A statement. Her voice is soft, which is the most dangerous kind of voice because it requires the listener to lean in, to concentrate, and concentration breaks confidence. Whitfield's smile widens because he interprets her quietness as fear. He interprets her composure as deference. He interprets her refusal to argue as weakness. This is his first miscalculation. He will make others. 3 months you've been here, Whitfield continues, his voice carrying the particular arrogance of a man who has never experienced consequences. I've watched you. You don't fit. The way you move. The way you think. Something's off about you, Bennett. You're not like the other nurses. And this place isn't for people who aren't like the other nurses. So I'm betting a week's salary you quit before Friday. You don't have the constitution for this work. You're just counting down to when you realize it and walk out that door. I'm just accelerating the timeline. He says this loud enough that it reaches the hallway. He says this with the confidence of someone whose family name is on the wall. He says this because he has never encountered someone whose real title is Master Chief, whose real experience spans 23 years and 4 tours, whose real constitution was forged in places he cannot imagine and tested in situations he will never understand. Laura raises her coffee cup to her lips and drinks. The coffee is still too hot. It burns her mouth slightly, and she does not flinch. This is the thing about trauma, it teaches you that pain is information, and information can be managed. She swallows. She looks at Whitfield with the kind of steady gaze that unsettles him more than any argument could, and then she walks past him toward the pediatric ward without saying another word. What she does not say is this: a child in room 347 is lying in a hospital bed because something went wrong during surgery. Her job, her real job, the one that is not listed on any hospital directory, is to find out what went wrong, document the pattern, and ensure it never happens again. She does not have permission to fail at this task. She does not have the luxury of quitting. And Dr. Whitfield, with his uncle on the board and his inherited confidence and his public declarations, is about to learn that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding it all together. Her hand finds the tarnished challenge coin in her scrub pocket as she walks toward the pediatric ward. The coin is warm from her body heat. The coin knows what she knows. The coin has already been to war. And now, without meaning to, Dr. Whitfield has declared war on her. The next morning, the cafeteria smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. Laura sat alone at a corner table, a turkey sandwich and juice box arranged in front of her, a stack of patient charts open beside her plate. She wasn't reading. She was documenting, photographing medication logs with her phone angled beneath the charts, each image precise, each timestamp recorded in the margins of a small notebook hidden inside her scrub pocket. The tarnished challenge coin pressed against her ribs, a weight she'd learned to ignore 18 months ago in Marja. Dr. Whitfield entered from the east corridor. She knew his footstep pattern by now, the confident stride of a man whose uncle sat on the hospital board, whose family name had been on the pediatric wing dedication plaque since 1987. He moved through the cafeteria like he owned it. In a sense, he did. Laura didn't look up from her charts. He approached from her left side, moving with the casual aggression of someone who had never been told no. His hand came down beneath her tray from below, not a bump but a deliberate upward thrust. The sandwich flew. The juice box tumbled. Everything scattered across the tile floor in a clattering chaos of broken ceramics and spilled pulp. The room went absolutely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused mid-bite. 14 people watched, and not one of them moved. Clumsy, Whitfield said to the room, not to her. He said it like she'd committed a crime. He said it like he was doing everyone a favor by pointing it out. Laura's jaw tightened. Just once. A single muscular contraction beneath her skin. Her hands, though, her hands remained perfectly steady as she pushed back from the table and knelt to gather the scattered papers. Muscle memory took over. Not the panic of an embarrassed nurse, but the deliberate precision of someone who'd assembled field medic kits under fire. Each page collected in sequence. Each piece of broken plate picked up with thumb and forefinger, not trembling, not hesitating. Whitfield dropped a patient chart directly onto the floor beside her, the pages fanning open with theatrical disdain. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said, his voice loud enough for the north wall to hear. "And maybe read it this time. You missed 3 orders yesterday. Sloppy work. We can't have sloppy in pediatrics, can we?" The silence stretched. 2 seconds. 3. Someone's coffee maker gurgled in the break room. Laura gathered the chart without speaking. She stood. She looked Whitfield directly in the eyes, blue eyes that had seen things he'd never see, that had watched trauma surgeons work by flashlight in caves, that had watched children die not from medical negligence but from IEDs and sepsis in villages where antibiotics didn't exist. She met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked back to her table. Her knuckles were white around the folder. Not because she was afraid. Because she was restraining herself. Saturday. She reopened her charts. She continued documenting as if Whitfield had never existed, as if the entire cafeteria had not just watched him try to break her into pieces. Around her, staff members returned to their conversations, uncomfortable, forced, the kind of talk that happens when everyone knows they've witnessed something they shouldn't have but lacked the spine to stop it. Whitfield lingered for a moment, waiting for tears or apologies or the kind of retreat that would signal victory. When neither came, he left, his jaw tight with the frustration of a man who'd thrown his best punch and hit nothing but air. That afternoon, he reassigned her to bedpan duty in front of the nursing station. He called her clumsy Bennett while other staff looked away. She took the assignment list, nodded once, her face showing absolutely nothing. The mask didn't slip. By evening, she was back in her tiny apartment on the edge of Savannah, sitting on the floor with her laptop and her phone, uploading encrypted files to a server she'd never name and couldn't be traced. 14 pediatric cases over 6 months. Surgery dates. Medication lot numbers. Complications that didn't match the official incident reports. One child had died 3 weeks before she arrived. A teenage girl. Pneumonia, they'd said. But the chart showed antibiotics that didn't exist in the pharmacy log. Another file showed a central line placement in a 3-year-old that shouldn't have been necessary. And then Dylan Chen, 12 years old, paralyzed from a spinal surgery 8 months ago, now showing signs of an infection pattern that mirrored the others. She sent the file with the subject line, "A lighthouse, 23 cases, pediatric complications, pattern consistent with deliberate mishandling." The response came at 11:16 p.m., acknowledged. Do not approach. Continue documentation. Support team positioned 40 miles north. Laura pulled the tarnished challenge coin from its pocket. She'd carried it for 16 years, from Marja to Baghdad to San Diego, from active duty to civilian cover. The coin was stamped with a rank she couldn't use anymore and a unit that didn't officially exist. She pressed it to her forehead, closed her eyes, and breathed the way she'd been trained to breathe. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The panic settled. She wasn't clumsy Bennett. She wasn't a nurse struggling to survive under the thumb of a man with institutional power and a family name that opened doors. She was Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett. She had held a surgical site together for 11 hours while rounds landed 40 meters away. She had taught medics how to identify compartment syndrome from a touch. She had trained 3 generations of operators in emergency stabilization protocols. And she had volunteered for this assignment knowing exactly what she was walking into. But that wasn't the worst part. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a code blue alert. Room 347. Dylan Chen. She ran before her mind caught up with her legs. The limp was more pronounced with speed, the shrapnel in her left hip screaming in protest, but her feet moved anyway. 3rd floor. East wing. The hallway was emptying, nurses and techs converging on the pediatric trauma bay like iron filings to a magnet. Dylan's monitors were screaming. Not the steady beep of a sleeping child, but the chaotic electronic shrieks of organs failing in real time. His oxygen saturation was dropping. Blood pressure collapsing. The night resident, a thin man with 3 weeks of pediatric experience, stood frozen beside the bed, his hands trembling, his eyes wide with the particular terror of a doctor watching a child die and not knowing how to stop it. Laura saw it immediately. The distended neck veins. The muffled heart sounds, barely audible even with a stethoscope, as if the sound was coming from underwater. The central line that had been placed during Dylan's initial surgery, now perforated, now bleeding directly into the pericardial sac surrounding his heart. Cardiac tamponade. The pressure was crushing his heart like a fist around a peach. His crashing, the resident whispered. I don't know, his pressure was fine at 11. Cardiac tamponade, Laura said. Her voice dropped an octave. Central line punctured his right ventricle. He needs pericardiocentesis in the next 90 seconds or he's dead. We should wait for Dr. Hayes. He doesn't have 90 seconds. Not a request. It was a command in the voice of someone who had been giving commands for 2 decades. She was already moving toward the bedside crash cart, hands moving on their own, opening the kit for emergency pericardiocentesis. Sterile gloves. A 16-gauge needle. Her muscle memory didn't hesitate. Dylan was conscious, barely, his eyes wide with the animal panic of suffocation. Laura's hand found his shoulder. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Something in her presence, something in the absolute absence of doubt in her movements, gave the boy permission to trust. She prepped the bedside. Palpated the xiphoid process with 2 fingers. Positioned the needle perpendicular to the sternum, then angled it slightly toward the left shoulder. 1 smooth motion. The needle advanced through skin, through fascia, through the pericardial membrane. She felt it give. Felt the sudden resistance of the sac. Then the aspiration began. 60 cubic centimeters of blood came out. 70. The needle's hub turned from dark red to pink as the pressure released, as Dylan's heart suddenly had room to beat again. The monitors responded instantly. Oxygen saturation climbing. 82%. 88. 93. Blood pressure rising from barely audible to something that could sustain a human being. The chaos of the monitors became rhythm. Order. Life. The resident stood motionless, watching. Laura was already charting, her hands moving across the digital record with the brisk efficiency of someone who had documented crises in field hospitals on 3 continents. Cardiac tamponade secondary to central line perforation. Pericardiocentesis performed. 60 cubic centimeters hemopericardium aspirated. Vital stabilizing. The attending arrived 30 seconds later, still tucking in his shirt, still half awake. He saw the empty needle, the settled monitors, the 12-year-old boy breathing normally for the first time in 3 minutes. He looked at Laura. Who did this? His voice had the particular tone of a surgeon watching someone else execute his surgery. Central line was misplaced during initial placement, Laura said quietly. She didn't offer explanations. She didn't apologize. She simply stated fact. It perforated the right ventricle. The puncture was slow enough that it took months to present, but the bleed into the pericardial sac was acute. The attending looked at the patient. At the monitors. At the needle in her hand. At the technique that had been flawless, that had been surgical, that had been executed by a nurse whose military discipline was now plainly visible to anyone looking. "You've done this before," he said. Not a question. Laura didn't answer. She was already removing her gloves, already stepping back from the bedside so the attending could move in, already erasing herself from the room with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned long ago that attention was a liability. She walked out of the pediatric ICU at 2:53 a.m., her phone already vibrating in her pocket. An incoming call. Encrypted. One word of greeting, status. Emergency procedure performed, she said quietly, walking past the nursing station where 3 staff members had their heads bent together, already whispering about how clumsy Bennett had saved Dylan Chen's life. The patient is stable. But they're going to ask questions. And if they do? The voice on the other end had the calm authority of someone calling from a command center 3 states away. Laura looked back toward room 347, where Dylan was breathing, where the boy's father, somewhere in a military hospital in Germany, would eventually get a phone call telling him his son was alive because a nurse he'd never heard of had known exactly what to do. Then, Laura said, "They're going to find out who I am." She disconnected before the response came. The heart monitor's alarm cut through the silence like a blade. 2 in the morning. 3rd floor, pediatric wing. Laura's eyes opened before the second beep registered. She was already moving, her body reading the rhythm before her conscious mind caught up, the muscle memory of 17 years and 47 combat deployments waking up inside her chest. Room 347. Dylan Chen. She was there in 14 seconds. The monitors screamed. The numbers told the story in their own language, blood pressure 64/38 and dropping, oxygen saturation falling from 94 to 89 to 84, heart rate climbing past 160 like an animal trapped in a cage. The central line. The one they'd placed in the OR 3 days ago. The one that had been bothering her since the moment the attending stepped back from the bedside with that satisfied nod that meant protocol complete, box checked, move on. Laura didn't call for help. She didn't reach for the emergency button. She moved to the bedside and placed her hand on Dylan's chest. His skin was cold. Clammy. The way skin got when the cardiovascular system was screaming. She could feel his heart thrashing beneath her palm, not the steady drum of normal sinus rhythm but the frantic fluttering of a heart trying to pump against pressure it shouldn't have to fight. Cardiac tamponade. The central line had migrated. Blood was filling the pericardial sac around his heart, compressing it, choking it. The boy's eyes opened. Terrified. 12 years old and smart enough to know something was catastrophically wrong. "Stay with me," Laura said. Her voice was low. Level. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. "You're going to be fine." She reached for the code card without looking. The 18-gauge needle was already in her mind's eye. The exact location. The angle. The depth. Everything she'd learned in Kandahar when a Marine had taken shrapnel to the chest and the only option was her hands and a field needle and the rain coming down like artillery. The attending physician burst through the doors at that moment, still buttoning his shirt, eyes unfocused. He saw the monitors. Saw the numbers. Opened his mouth to give an order. Laura was already moving past him. The skin prep. The alcohol. Her hand steady as surgical steel. The needle rose to the space between the 5th and 6th ribs, the xiphoid process landmark marking the angle. She'd done this 47 times. 47 lives. 47 people who owed her a breath they didn't know they owed. The needle went in. The resistance changed. Tissue gave way. The pericardial membrane parted like a held breath releasing. And then, the hiss of air escaping as the pressure valve opened and the fluid that had been crushing Dylan's heart began to drain into the catch basin. "What are you?" the attending started. "Pericardiocentesis," Laura said. Her eyes never left the monitor. Central line perforation into the pericardial sac. 200 milliliters minimum. Probably closer to 3. The numbers on the monitor began to change. Not dramatically. Not like the movies where everything suddenly resolved. Real medicine was slower. Quieter. BP climbing, 68. 72, 78. The saturation rising, 86. 89, 92. The heart rate dropping from its frantic sprint back into something resembling normal rhythm. Sinus rhythm. 260. The attending stepped closer. His face had gone the color of old surgical gloves. "How did you know that was there?" His voice came out smaller than a man his age should sound. "How did you move that fast? How did you—" He stopped. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of questions he didn't have answers for. Laura didn't respond. She was watching Dylan's chest rise and fall. The pink returning to his lips. The panic draining from his eyes as the pressure released and his body remembered how to breathe without fighting gravity and his own anatomy. "Get me a portable chest X-ray," she said. Not a request. A command. "And call cardiothoracic. He's going back to surgery. The line needs to come out and we need to confirm there's no myocardial injury." The attending moved. He moved because the authority in her voice didn't leave room for anything else. By 2:48 a.m., Dylan Chen's heart was stable. By 3:15, he was back in the OR. By 4 a.m., the cardiologist had confirmed what Laura already knew: the perforation was clean, the tamponade was the only complication, and the boy would live because someone had been awake at exactly the right moment and knew exactly what to do. By 6 a.m., the first question arrived. It came in the form of Dr. Whitfield, wearing yesterday's cologne and today's certainty, flanking himself with the hospital's chief medical officer and 2 board members who looked uncomfortable in their own tailored suits. They materialized in the staff break room where Laura was pouring her third coffee, her hand still slightly sticky from the OR chlorhexidine, her eyes tracking the clock, knowing that time was now the enemy in a different way. "We need to discuss what happened with the Chen case," Whitfield said. His voice had that smooth confidence of a man whose uncle sat on the board and whose network included 3 attending surgeons, a hospital administrator, and a lawyer who owed him a favor. "Laura, would you walk us through the procedure you performed?" She did. The facts. The findings. The clinical indicators. The response. The CMO's jaw tightened slightly. "That's a level of diagnostic thinking that exceeds standard nursing scope," he said carefully. "And the procedure itself, the speed of execution, the anatomical precision, those are concerning." Whitfield nodded. He already had his phone in his hand. "I took the liberty of reviewing your personnel file last night," he said. 3 months employed. No previous surgical nursing experience listed in your credentials. No advanced certification in emergency procedures. And yet somehow you're performing life-saving interventions that most attending physicians would hesitate to execute under pressure. Laura set down her coffee. Black. No sugar. The cup made a sound like a small door closing. "The boy was dying," she said. "I intervened." "Yes," Whitfield said. "And while we're grateful he survived, we need to understand your training background. Your previous employment. Your nursing school records." He nodded to one of the board members, who was already writing something on a legal pad. "We're going to need to conduct a full review of every chart you've touched since your arrival. Every patient interaction. Every medication administration. Every." The central line was misplaced by Dr. Vance in the OR, Laura said. Her voice hadn't changed. "Level. Steady. But something in the tone had shifted, not threatening, but no longer deferential. The complication pattern over the past 3 months involves 5 pediatric postoperative infections and 2 major line migrations. All children. All under Vance's supervision. And all initiated within 48 hours of surgery. The room went silent. The kind of silence that has weight. That's a serious allegation, the CMO said slowly. That's an observation, Laura replied. I documented the timeline in the patient charts. Cross-reference dates of surgery with complication onset. You'll find the pattern. Whitfield's smile never wavered, but his eyes had changed. Regardless of whatever pattern exists, we still need to vet your qualifications. For patient safety, you understand. We'll need to contact your nursing school, review transcripts, speak with previous employers about your background and training. By 7 a.m., the calls had been made. By 8 a.m., a representative from the hospital's legal counsel had been assigned to oversee her status. By noon, the outside investigator arrived, a thin man in a grey suit who carried a briefcase and a court order to audit every chart Laura had touched since her arrival date. He set up in a small office adjacent to the medical records department and began pulling files with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before and intended to find something. By 1:11 p.m., the investigator requested her original nursing school transcripts, her licensure documentation, and the contact information for all previous employers. By 2:45 p.m., her badge had been revoked. By 3:13 p.m., security escorted her from the building. The walk to the parking lot felt longer than 3 months. Her legs moved. Her face remained composed. But somewhere inside her chest, the 6-month operation, the deep cover infiltration, the classified monitoring assignment, the mission that had been assigned directly through JSOC channels to investigate potential war crimes hidden behind hospital protocol and surgeon arrogance, began to unravel like a suture pulled from a healing wound. She'd been placed here for a reason. A girl. Colonel Chen's daughter. Admitted for routine appendectomy 2 years ago. Never came home. The post-operative complication list had 7 names on it now. 7 children. And if the pattern held, if the misplaced central lines and the elevated infection rates and the surgical complications that didn't quite fit standard deviation curves were what she suspected they were, then Dylan Chen was lucky. But 7 other families weren't. And now she was out. Laura sat in her car in the parking lot of Seattle General, the Charleston humidity pressing against the windows like a living thing, and stared at her revoked badge. The photograph on it showed a woman in scrubs, hair pulled back, expression neutral. Nobody special. Just a nurse. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Dr. Whitfield had already moved. By the time Laura's car had even started, he was 2 phone calls ahead of her, calling the nursing board, calling the licensing authority, calling every contact in her fabricated background to ask vague questions about her reliability and training. He'd smelled something wrong in the way she'd moved, something wrong in the precision of her response, something wrong in a woman who could save a life with surgical expertise that exceeded his own and then calmly explain a pattern of complications he'd been covering up for 18 months. He didn't know who she was. But he knew she was dangerous. And he was going to bury her before she could prove it. By 6:06 a.m., before Dylan's monitors even settled into their normal rhythm, Dr. Whitfield was already in the administrative corridor with his phone pressed to his ear. His uncle had texted him at 3 a.m., not a question, a reminder, *we protect our own. Whitfield understood the message. Laura Bennett had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She had performed a procedure that no civilian nurse in her 3rd month should have known how to execute. The sutures had been perfect. The decompression had been surgical. The precision had been military. He made 4 calls before 7 a.m. The first was to Harold Pierce, the hospital board chair and his father's golf partner. "We have a credential issue," Whitfield said, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than malice. 3rd month nurse performing advanced interventions. "I need it documented. Officially." The second call went to Mercy Medical Institute in Portland, where Laura had completed her RN certification 5 years ago. Can you confirm the clinical hours logged by Laura Bennett? Specifically any advanced procedure training. We're doing a routine audit. He didn't ask directly, he implied. His tone suggested there might be discrepancies. The registrar promised to review the file. By 8:51 a.m., he'd contacted 2 other board members and just suggested, nothing inflammatory, that there might be gaps in her background. 3 months, he said quietly to each of them. And she's performing procedures we usually reserve for surgeons. Doesn't that concern you? By 9 a.m., he'd arranged for an outside investigator, a woman named Cassandra Reed, who specialized in credential fraud and had reviewed cases for the state medical board. Every chart she's touched in 90 days, he instructed. I want to know if there's a pattern. Unauthorized procedures. Scope creep. The investigator arrived by 10 a.m. with a tablet and a clinical eye that missed nothing. By noon, it was done. Laura's badge was scanned and flagged. The system rejected it at the medication dispensary. Rejected it at the secure server. Her access to patient records vanished. A suspension notice appeared in her personnel file, *pending investigation into scope of practice and credential verification. No specifics. No opportunity to defend. Just the words *pending and *investigation*, which carried the weight of accusation even without proof. Whitfield had her removed from the schedule by 1 p.m. She was told not to return to the unit. She was told to surrender her badge to HR. She was told, in the sterile language of hospital administration, that she was being placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of the external review. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded once, removed her badge, and walked out through the employee entrance into the humid Georgia afternoon. The thing Whitfield didn't know, the thing none of them knew, was that Laura had already lost more than a job. She'd lost her window. The pattern of pediatric post-operative complications that had brought her to Seattle General in the first place would continue unexamined. Whatever was happening in those operating rooms, whatever was killing children on tables they were supposed to survive, would keep happening. And she was shut out. By 3 a.m., she was in Rose's Diner on Route 80, 3 miles from the hospital, sitting in a booth that smelled like grease and burnt coffee and the ghost of 1,000 sleepless nights. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric song, a sound like the world's heart beating too fast. Her coffee had gone cold 40 minutes ago. She stared at the dark surface, watching her own reflection stare back, hollow-eyed, lined with exhaustion, a woman who'd held other people's lives together while her own fell apart. The tarnished challenge coin sat on the table between the salt and pepper shakers. She'd pulled it from her locker before leaving. The coin from Marja. 2011, the weight of it never got lighter, no matter how many years passed. 11 hours. That's how long she'd knelt in that courtyard with rounds snapping over her head like angry wasps, her hands pressed into a surgical site, keeping blood inside where it belonged while Marines returned fire and someone's radio kept saying *medevac inbound, 9 minutes out, 8 minutes out, 7 minutes out. 14 operators. All of them walking. All of them because her hands didn't shake when the world was ending. Colonel Marcus Chen had been the youngest of them. Green beret with a leadership style that made people follow him into impossible places. He'd taken shrapnel meant for 2 privates. She'd held him together until the helicopter came. And now his paralyzed 12-year-old son, the boy she'd been sent here to protect, was going to die because she'd been too obvious. Too good. Too much. Her phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m. Text from her 16-year-old son, Marcus, the one named after the man whose life she'd held together in a courtyard 10,000 miles away, *Mom. Dylan's asking for you. His dad says you're not allowed back. She typed, *tell him I'm sorry. Delete. She typed, *tell Dylan his mom says he's going to be fine. Delete. She settled on, *I'm sorry. 3 words. The only ones that fit. The thing about being a trained operative is that you understand the difference between a setback and a failure. A setback is temporary, adjustable. You find another route. You go dark and you wait and you move when the opportunity presents itself. But a failure meant the mission was over. The patient died. The teen didn't come home. And Laura Bennett was sitting in a diner at 3 a.m. staring at her reflection and wondering if Chen would survive long enough for her to find another way in, because the first way had just collapsed into ash. The investigators' report would take 5 business days. The board hearing would happen on a Thursday. Whitfield had already prepared his presentation, already lined up his witnesses, already guaranteed his victory with the kind of institutional power that comes from having an uncle on the board and a medical school mentor who'd made partner at a firm that handled the hospital's liability coverage. Laura watched her reflection and traced the outline of the challenge coin with one cold finger. Marja. The shrapnel had entered her left calf at 03 for 7 hours. She'd kept it in there for another 6 hours because removing it meant stopping the compressions on Chen's wound, meant risking the tourniquet pressure, meant losing her hands to pain and motion and the kind of shock that makes you useless. Pain is information, the corpsmen had taught her. Pain is data. Your job is to process it and move anyway. But that was the field. This was different. This was a hospital where the enemy wore a white coat and had a board member on speed dial. This was a place where being too skilled was more dangerous than being incompetent, because competence raised questions. The diner's door chimed at 3:41 a.m. A trucker shuffled in, ordered coffee. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and 50 years of overnight shifts written into her posture, refilled Laura's cup without asking. The coffee was still bitter and still cold. "Rough night, honey?" the waitress asked. "Yeah," Laura said. Something like that. The waitress moved on. Laura was left alone with the sound of the fluorescent lights and her own reflection and the weight of the challenge coin and the knowledge that somewhere in Seattle General, a 12-year-old boy with a green beret father and a future that should have belonged to him was about to lose the only person in that hospital who understood what was really happening to children on operating tables. The coin caught the light. Tarnished. Heavy. Proof that she'd been somewhere, done something, survived something. Proof that she wasn't just a nurse. But proof didn't matter if she couldn't get back inside. The conference room door swung open and 16-year-old James Bennett walked through it carrying something that made the hospital board members go rigid. A shadow box. Hand-polished mahogany. Behind the glass, medals arranged in descending rows caught the fluorescent light like small accusations. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. Purple Heart again. And at the bottom, a navy cross with its distinctive blue ribbon, looking older than his mother but no less luminous. "Mom," James said quietly, setting the box on the polished table in front of the general, "they need to see these." Laura's posture didn't change. She sat in the metal folding chair like she'd been welded to it, eyes forward, breathing steady as a metronome. But something shifted in the room's air pressure. Whitfield's face lost color. The board chair leaned forward. The hospital's legal counsel set down her pen. Video feed crackled from the hospital room where Colonel Marcus Chen stood beside Dylan's bed, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. The paralyzed 12-year-old looked smaller in that moment, witnessing something only the adults understood. Colonel Chen raised his eyes to the camera and spoke one word, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Lighthouse." The security guard at the door, Desert Storm vet named Henderson, 31 years on the force, went absolutely rigid. His posture straightened like someone had driven a railroad spike through his spine. When his voice came, it wasn't the casual guard tone anymore. It was a formal announcement, the kind taught at Coronado Island and Quantico, the kind that changes the atmospheric pressure in rooms. Master Chief Petty Officer on deck. The 2-star general on the Medical Oversight Committee, a woman named Holloway who'd flown in from Walter Reed, picked up the file in front of her with hands that trembled visibly. Not from fear. From recognition. She opened it and began reading, her voice steady but her jaw working like she was grinding down fury. 3 Purple Hearts. She paused. The room heard nothing but the ventilator wheeze from the hospital bed on the speaker. 2 bronze stars. And a classified operation. Marja. 2009. Another pause. Longer. Single-handed surgical site maintenance under sustained fire. 11 hours. General Holloway looked directly at Laura. The official record says the shrapnel wound to your left leg was sustained protecting a command officer's team from IED fragmentation. The speaker crackled. Colonel Chen's voice came through steady and clear. Master Chief Bennett took shrapnel meant for my team. That's why she walks with a limp. And that's why my son is alive tonight. Because a Navy SEAL saved my life in Helmand Province, and 14 years later, a nurse saved my boy's life at 2 in the morning, and they're the same woman. 10 seconds of absolute silence. Not the kind that passes quickly. The kind that accumulates weight. It wasn't a request. It was testimony. It was proof. It was the moment Dr. Whitfield understood that his uncle on the board couldn't save him, that his network of allies had just become a liability, that the woman he'd spent 3 months trying to destroy had spent 3 months saving his hospital from itself. Whitfield's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No words came. Laura didn't move. Didn't acknowledge the general's stare or her son's presence or the security guard standing straighter than a flagpole. She kept her hands flat on the table, her breathing unchanged, because that was what Master Chief Petty Officers did when the battle shifted. They didn't celebrate early. They observed the field. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it incinerated careers. By 6 p.m. that evening, a visitor's phone video surfaced on social media. Grainy cafeteria footage. Dr. Whitfield smirk. The tray clattering to the floor. Laura kneeling to pick up scattered papers while staff watched in paralyzed discomfort. And now, posted with context, viewers saw exactly who she was. The caption read, Dr. Bully's Navy SEAL Master Chief. Hospital board meeting proves it. By 8 p.m., the video had been shared 47,000 times. News outlets picked it up. Decorated combat veteran targeted by hospital physician. Twitter exploded. Reddit threads. TikTok. The kind of viral moment that burns through the internet like napalm because the story was too perfect, too just, too satisfying in its cosmic symmetry. At 9:15 p.m., Dr. Calvin Pierce, Whitfield's medical school mentor, a decorated Army surgeon who'd supervised his trauma rotation at Johns Hopkins in 2008, released a public statement. The words were surgical in their precision. The behavior displayed in the viral video is disgraceful and unbecoming of the medical profession. I disavow any former student who would treat colleagues with such contempt. This physician's actions do not reflect the values we instill at our institution. That one statement triggered an avalanche. If his mentor had disavowed him publicly, the institution's liability insurance became a problem. If the insurance became a problem, the board convened an emergency review. If the board reviewed his file, they found 17 complaints dating back 7 years. Complaints he'd buried. Complaints from nurses. Complaints from residents. Complaints from people too frightened or too junior to make them stick. By 3 a.m. the next morning, federal investigators arrived at Seattle General. Not hospital administrators. Federal. They came with badges and warrants and the kind of quiet authority that makes hospital administrators pour cold coffee down the front of their shirts. They examined every pediatric case file from the past 18 months. Every post-operative complication. Every notation. Every timeline. What they found was systematic. Dr. Whitfield had been falsifying complications documentation to cover up a pattern of procedural errors. Not just errors, negligence. The kind that kills children. The kind that generates federal prosecutions. By noon, his privileges were revoked. By end of business, he'd resigned. By Friday, the hospital board had expelled him. The network he'd built to protect himself had collapsed because the people in it realized they were protecting a liability. Laura watched it all from the coffee station where she stood with General Holloway, who'd stayed overnight and was now drinking her third cup of black coffee like it was the sweetest victory she'd ever tasted. 6 months, the general said quietly. That's how long this investigation will take. Federal. Thorough. And when it's done, you're heading patient safety protocols for the entire Seattle General system. Official. Transparent. Full authority. Laura nodded once. No triumph in her face. Just the simple acknowledgement of orders received and understood. 6 months later. The parking lot at Seattle General was full of the ordinary sounds of a hospital morning. Ambulance arriving. Doors sliding open. Rubber wheels squeaking on linoleum. Laura walked through it in fresh scrubs, her ID badge reading Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, patient safety consultant in letters no one could miss anymore. Her left leg moved with the slight hitch that came from shrapnel and 18 surgeries and 14 years of physical therapy, but her pace never wavered. She passed a folding table near the strip mall entrance, the kind set up for pharmaceutical representatives and insurance companies and people desperately trying to claw their way back to respectability. Dr. Whitfield sat behind it in a suit that cost $50 and looked it. Supplemental insurance pamphlets fanned out in front of him like the last cards in a poker hand he'd already lost. His eyes tracked Laura's scrubs as she walked past. The hollow recognition of a man who'd mistaken a quiet person for a weak one. She didn't slow down. Didn't acknowledge him. Just kept walking, her hand touching the challenge coin in her pocket, now polished bright, the tarnish finally removed, and held that steady gait like she was walking through fire. Inside Dylan Chen's room, physical therapy was happening. The boy who'd been paralyzed was taking his first independent steps, his father's hand hovering near his back without quite touching, tears running down Colonel Chen's face like he couldn't stop them and didn't want to. On the bedside table, the challenge coin sat in a position of honor, still catching light, no longer hidden, no longer a secret. Colonel Chen shook Laura's hand when she appeared in the doorway. His grip was firm enough to communicate gratitude that words couldn't reach. The investigation you started saved 6 other families, he said. 6 children who would have died if you hadn't walked into this hospital 3 months ago. Laura nodded. That evening, she taught a class to new nurses in the hospital's training room. 20 faces. Fresh uniforms. The kind of hope that comes from not yet understanding what the job actually costs. She finished her lecture on patient safety protocols, on documentation, on never looking away when something doesn't feel right. Then she paused and spoke one final thought, her voice quiet in a way that made them lean forward to hear it. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together, she said. Look for them. Trust them. Protect them. The new nurses didn't quite understand yet. But they leaned forward anyway, sensing that they were being told something true. Laura touched the coin in her pocket and smiled slightly, remembering the diner at 3 a.m., the cold coffee, the moment she thought the mission was finished. The moment she thought it was over. She was wrong. It was just beginning. If you've made it this far, you know what it means when someone holds their ground under pressure. Subscribe for more stories of hidden strength, quiet courage, and the people no one sees coming. Like this video if you believe the quietest heroes deserve recognition. And comment, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real value?